Episode 91, Audiobook Roundup with the Daniels. Welcome to the Visionary Variety Podcast, where we cover cool stuff like photo, video, film, books, and technology. So switch on your brain and enjoy the show. Welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Daniel Grove, and I also have on the show with us as our special returning guest, Daniel Walczak. And he is, chemically dependent upon audiobooks, as I am. So, Daniel, I love to have you on the podcast anytime we do any discussion about audiobooks, because you listen to a lot of audiobooks, as I do, and also you are into a lot of the same types of stories as I am. Sci-fi, fantasy, good stories, deep world building, things like that.
Absolutely.
So we're going to get into later talking about our favorite books that we've listened to recently, kind of an overview and a review, without any spoilers. But before we get to that, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself? So let's start off with the basics. Who are you? Where are you from? And what do you do?
Yeah. So I'm Daniel. Obviously, you've introduced me. I'm up in the Edmond, Oklahoma area, just outside of Oklahoma City. Did a lot of living in Tulsa, was in Chicago and Austin, where I met you. And I grew up in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area up in the north. Somehow I still remain, nice, even though I grew up in the north. I don't know how it happened, but I'm happy to be here. I've been in Edmond for just over a year now. I moved here to work at Life Church, and it's the largest church in America, 34 locations.
Wow.
And it's been
kind of a big deal.
It's pretty awesome. It's been a wild ride and loving what I'm doing. I'm in the finance department as a systems analyst.
So you have to be a nerd.
Yeah, you have to be a nerd. Absolutely.
It's a requirement.
It's been great, though, because just working for a purpose and with a purpose is really exciting. I've worked in a lot of different finance, banking, retail. I worked with excellence because that's who I am. But working for the church, I feel like there's a greater cause that I'm working for. It's not just for the paycheck. Yeah. It's not just for providing for my family. It adds a whole nother layer of purpose to what I'm doing, and it's really cool. It's not like anything I've experienced so far, and absolutely love it.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's nothing quite like waking up on a Monday morning and just realizing you get to go to work instead of you have to.
Yeah,
it's a game changer.
Get to go to work. Absolutely.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, today is Halloween. It's October 31st as of this recording, which is kind of cool, kind of weird.
Blowing my mind.
I'm not a big Halloween person, personally. Did you celebrate Halloween growing up?
Our family wasn't huge on it. When it was convenient, I suppose you could say, as we were in maybe a cookie cutter neighborhood that all the kids were around doing it, we would put a costume on, but it wasn't something that we did every year by any means. But I remember one of my favorite costumes, though, was this garbage man, and not like a career, not like a career garbage man necessarily.
Not a civil employee.
Think more like a Mega Man X mini boss. I had this.
That brings back memories.
Yeah, I had this cardboard box cut out with my head and arms, and I had taped different pieces of garbage to me, and I had kind of a cardboard cannon on my arm like Mega Man. It was pretty dope.
That's pretty much cosplaying.
Yeah. Something I have not revisited in my adulthood, but should totally try out sometime.
You're missing out. Growing up, we never did trick-or-treating or the typical Halloween stuff. I think I trick-or-treated once for about 5 minutes. I ran to a specific neighbor's house, got candy, and then I had to run back home because we were going to church that night. Which sounds really lame, but it actually wasn't. My whole childhood for Halloween, we went to our church's fall festival, and it was so much fun.
Is that like hay rides and hay mazes, and did they crown a hay king?
We actually did it inside. Now the church, which I grew up at, was Tree of Life in New Braunfels, really big church. They do it outside, and it's awesome. But it was a little simpler back in my day.
Oh yeah,
and it was inside, lots of candy. All my friends were there in one small area, games and costumes and stuff. Yeah, it was fun.
That's awesome.
No regrets. I enjoyed it.
No, absolutely. My churches always did like a trunk or treat. where they'd get like
that's a new thing.
all the parents around and do it that way. Kind of their little harvest festival, if you will.
Now, if you have a VW Bug and the engine is in the back, is it still a trunk on the front?
Yeah, I think so.
Hood or treat? That has a different connotation.
Treating in the hood.
Now, we're both fans of movies. Did you have a scary movie growing up that just scared the pants off you?
Nightmare Before Christmas.
Terrifying.
Can't say that I was really into scary movies. I remember, when I was younger, Sixth Sense was pretty scary. But I never really, carried that through into my adulthood. I tried to watch Cloverfield Paradox recently, not really knowing what I was walking into. And by the time I got to the scene with the chick that was like generated into the wires and was screaming and dying and had the things coming out of her skin, I was pretty much done with that movie. It was just a little bit beyond what I could handle, I think.
Yeah, I quit sometime after that scene too, but I don't think it was because the movie itself. I think as kids were waking up, and I don't know what happened, but we didn't finish it either. It's kind of weird.
I have to get back to it then.
Yeah, I am curious to see what happens. As for myself, I did grow up watching scary movies because, my parents were like good parents and stuff, and they didn't want me like traumatized with terrible movies.
They loved you?
Yeah, weird. So I didn't watch scary movies growing up. I still to this day, I don't like scary movies. Like being scared, seeing evil and death and stuff like that is not like entertainment to me. I don't want that kind of adrenaline in my system to have fun. So not my cup of tea at all. But some movies that do stand out as freaky and really just disturbing more is, first one is The Cell. Now, people that like love horror movies probably like, seriously, like that movie was scary to you. It's like psychologically disturbing. Jennifer Lopez, J-Lo, is in the head of this deranged mental illness victim, psycho killer guy. She's trying to solve this case and figure out where this girl is and what and why. And it was just really like the imagery was amazing. Cinematography was great, very beautiful visually, but just the themes and what was happening was really just like, got under my skin. That and Event Horizon. You ever see Event Horizon?
I have not.
It's a classic sci-fi horror. Cool movie, but there's a black hole that, drives this spaceship and it opens up and hell comes through. It's like a gateway to hell through this black hole. Really creepy, gory, like scenes and stuff that happens that just freak me out.
Yikes.
So that's about it. I don't like scary movies.
Now that we're talking about scary movies, I did remember there was a phase where I really liked the mental break, like the broken mind type, like hallucinations or escaping into another reality while something horrible was happening, and like Shutter Island and Sucker Punch are two that come to mind, where you're just like, as you start the movie, you're like, what's happening exactly, and you get to the end and you're like, what just happened? It's really cool.
Those are
messes
fun.
With your mind a little bit. It's a lot of fun, but also kind of scary. Those scary movie enthusiasts are gonna be like, no, Daniel, wrong.
You're a wimp. Hey, no shame. Well, that's enough about us. Let's get to talking about some books. So I'll start with my first one on my list is Cinder by Marissa Meyer. So this is a book that you listen to as well, right?
Yep.
Like in like a day or two.
I gave it 2 days,
Let it breathe a little.
Yeah.
It's only like what, 10 hours? I don't know.
Yeah, 10.
Yeah, it took me about a week and a half to listen to. I really enjoyed it. So Cinder is the first book in a series of 4 or 5 books by Marissa Meyer called the Lunar Chronicles. Now, these books are so cool because they are a sci-fi futuristic twist on some of the Disney princesses. So Cinder is, surprise, surprise, Cinderella. The next book is Scarlet, which is Red Riding Hood. Then there's Cress, which is Rapunzel. And then there's Winter, which is Snow White. There's even the evil queen in these books, who's Queen Lavanna, the queen of the moon. So there's really cool sci-fi elements that I thoroughly enjoyed that were very creative. We've got 2 branching groups of humanity, one which are lunar humans, the other are still on Earth. There's also cyborgs, which is, you're still a human, but maybe the only thing left of you that's human is your brain, or more commonly, like different parts of your body have been replaced because they were damaged or whatever. Cinderella is one of them, or Cinder is actually one of those. She's a cyborg. So some of her extremities, like her right hand, and I think her right foot or shin or whatever, some different parts of her body are synthetic. She also has like brain implants that, just kind of help her see and read things. It's really cool. So we've got a lot of like Battle Angel Alita vibes going on in this movie. Very cyberpunk, kind of in a dystopian Beijing setting. So I guess in this book, Cinder is Asian, I'm assuming. Did you pick up on that too?
Yes. So it definitely felt like a kind of an Asian feel, but there was a point in the movie where they had talked about all of humanity, like maybe 120 years ago, all of humanity going through like major crisis and war, and basically everything was destroyed. And they rebuilt not to their actual culture, but they like took bits and pieces of like kind of what was best. And so like when they were talking about it, it definitely felt, it's New Beijing, and it definitely felt very Asian the whole time.
Some of the names are Asian too.
Yeah. And I don't, but then Cinder.
Don't spoil it.
No spoilers. But she's from Europe, so maybe she's fair-haired and very white. You're right. You don't know.
I really enjoyed the story. There's a lot of cool sci-fi elements. Like I said, there's a good amount of character building. My only one complaint was like the sidekick robot was kind of annoying. Maybe it's just the voice. It just felt a little silly.
You didn't like Aiko?
Yeah, Aiko. I didn't. She just was kind of gimmicky. Sidekick, useless robot with way too much spunk.
Yeah. And I think it contributed slightly to the whiny kind of like teenage girl is the protagonist, and she has this whiny girl robot. So, my rating on this book is a solid 4 stars. It's a really good book. It keeps you on the edge of your seat. It keeps you engaged. But there were a couple things in there where maybe they did it too well. Maybe they just really wrote a really good like teenage girl, and from my perspective it just feels whiny. I don't know, but some of that kind of took away from the overall book for me.
Yeah, it's a 4-star for me as well, and I don't have like really big complaints that I can just lay out on a list like this is why it's not a 5-star or whatever, except for the Aiko character, and she was a little whiny, but it's a good story, and I definitely encourage, if anyone's interested in princesses, which I'm not particularly interested in princesses beyond, my photography job, which is funny because I just photographed all the Disney princesses last Saturday. So they're fresh on my mind.
There you go.
And I'm doing some really cool composite photos, by the way. If you want to see those, you can go to my Instagram, Daniel Grove Photo. So you can see those photos there. But this is a fun take, that I guess these princesses aren't copywritten anymore. Like, are they property of Disney? I don't know.
I feel like they're definitely still property of Disney, but they didn't actually like take anything. They just like almost like if you wrote a parody, like Weird Al doesn't have to pay anybody to like write a parody, right? He can just write a parody.
Good point. Maybe she's within the Creative Commons kind of that copyright free area. I don't know. Yeah, I cannot wait to read the rest of these books. They're really cool. The world is really big. There's a lot of cool political like tie-ins and different agendas, understanding of what's going on. I'm excited. I can't wait to read the rest of them. I have them all, so it's just a matter of time.
I really enjoyed just how detailed Marissa gets in her like explanations of things, and it might even just be a little bit of a sentence. I found there was like a couple times where she just pointed out a detail, like her character got distracted and noticed something. Had nothing to do with anything that was going on, but it just made that moment so much more real. And I thought that was really, really cool. I don't know that I've really seen that in the past where they like the character noticed something that wasn't pivotal to the story. It was kind of cool.
Yeah, she's really putting herself in the shoes of that character in that world. What would really happen? Yep. So there you go. Cinder. Definitely check it out. The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. All right. So that's first on my list. And like I said earlier, you listened to that too, but you have some other books on your list. So what's number 2 on your list, Daniel?
Yeah. So the next one I'm jumping into, I always hark back to this. This is my favorite series so far of all time. It is the Divine Dungeon saga. It is I don't know if it's a saga. It's 5 books. Is a saga 5 books?
That's a great term. I don't know.
All right. It's my favorite saga of all time. The Divine Dungeon, and its fifth book just released on audio. It released like almost a year ago, like 9 months or something. And I'm a stickler about only audiobooking, so I was waiting very patiently, and it's finally out.
I will not read a physical book.
Yeah, but it's called Eternium, but in the fifth entry in the Divine Dungeon saga, and I'm super excited to get to it.
Yeah, you turned me on to that book series, and I actually listened to the very first one. What was the name of the first one?
Dungeon Born.
Dungeon Born, yeah. So I really enjoyed it. It was very cool. Just seeing the character building. I think this book probably has the best character building I've seen, or rather listened to. I keep saying read, but you know what I mean. Read, listen to, same thing. The best character building I've observed or enjoyed in a book. But the character building is different because in the first book, the main character is basically captured somehow into this magical gemstone. And he becomes aware that he's inside of a gemstone, but he's not quite sure where, how, or why. And then he is sentient, obviously, and he gains control over his surroundings. So he basically becomes a dungeon, like the classic dungeons that we see as a major set piece in Dungeons and Dragons, in classic fantasy RPGs, where you're going into a dungeon to fight a boss to get loot. Like it all comes full circle in this story, and you understand, where do those gold coins come from? Why is there always equipment left when a monster dies?
Yeah,
it's so fun.
It's a lot of fun. I've never seen anything, from the perspective of the dungeon before, and it was a fresh take, and it's really, really cool. And
yeah.
Dakota keeps things pretty light and humorous, but it also definitely has more serious themes to it as well.
Oh yeah, good balance.
I very rarely laugh out loud in like a literal sense whenever I'm listening to an audiobook, but he gets me chuckling sometimes.
So you truly did lull.
I lulled. I did. I haven't raffled yet. I haven't raffled, but I've lulled.
LOL'd IRL.
Oh yeah.
So next on my list is Anathem by Neil Stephenson. And I am 85% through this book, so I've got about 3 hours left. And this is a definite 5-star. I love this book so much. I've listened to a lot of sci-fi and fantasy in my day. By that I mean like the past 5 years, where I've really just jumped into actually catching up on books that I've never read when I was a teenager. And I've got to say, this book has taught me more about astrophysics, mostly philosophy, and even some quantum realm stuff. It's getting into quantum theory in the latter part of this book. And man, it is deep. Like if you're an intellectual that also loves sci-fi and fantasy, you'll love this book. If you do not care to hear a discussion about how does consciousness tie into the quantum realm, and does our like decisions influence, or are they influenced by higher dimensions of alternate universes, you may not care about this book. But if you like that stuff, you'll love this book.
So you've got me thinking. There is Neil Stephenson like a college professor in astrophysics and the quantum realm, or like where does he get the ideas? He might be very well read.
I don't know. I'm so curious about that too, because I've encountered this too with other sci-fi novels where I basically pick up on this author is really smart in this area. Like, how do they know? Are they, sometimes there are professors. I've heard a lot of times where an engineer or a professor gets into sci-fi authoring, and that's how they know, the basis for a lot of their stories. Because they already have like a master's degree or, decades of a career in that field. And I love that. Arthur C. Clarke is a good example of that. But I'm not sure. I don't know anything about Neil Stephenson. But I can't wait to find more of his books. I hope there's a sequel to Anathem. It's good, and it's really, really cool. So the basic premise of this book, and I'll try not to go too long-winded about it. It is a 32-hour book, but the short or the long. Wait, hey, you remember our college professor Jesse? He would always mix it up. You see the long and the short sometimes.
Yep.
That? Sometimes it was the long and the short. Other times it was the short or the long, and I never knew which one. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, which is another thing he also said. So the basic premise of this story is you follow a monk, and he is a monk of a very large monastery of perhaps thousands of individuals, and they live in a mountain, which is chiseled out. It's very well, formed, and it's kind of a small city inside this mountain structure. And there are 3 groups of monks in this monastery. The first is the Tinners, which is the main character. He's a tinner. And that means they stay in their monastery for 10 years. And then they get to go out for about 10 days every 10 years, every decade. They get to go out and kind of meet their family, kind of catch up on things, interact, have fun. maybe make a little bit of money, and then they got to go back in. They're locked up, and this is a lifelong commitment if you're one of these monks. Then there's the centenarians, which they do the same thing, but every 100 years. So some people live and die as a centenarian and never get to see the outside world, but others do. So they come out every 100 years and interact and learn and, teach and things like that. And then there's a third group called the millenarians, and they don't come out to the outside world until every 1,000 years. And it's just really crazy. Yeah. Commitment, right? And naturally, there's a lot of secrecy. So these three different groups don't have any interaction with each other because they may influence the other group. And the whole purpose of these monasteries, and there's actually multiple monasteries across the planet. There's lots of other groups that also have their own flavor of their own beliefs. But the main focus of this monk, culture is to preserve knowledge through the ups and downs of secular civilization, but also to learn the higher purpose of living. And it's not even spiritual. There's kind of an esoteric element to some of the monks. There's like a split. There's like one school of thought that believes that there's like this higher realm that's kind of like a heaven realm that you can learn from. Then there's the other half that are more atheistic, and they're just like, nah, it's just knowledge and math, and physics. So you kind of see the dynamics between the two groups. And in the story, there is an elder monk who is kind of the teacher of the main character, and he, in secret, has been observing something out in space coming towards the planet. And then there's this cover-up, and he disappears, and the main character kind of does some sneaking around and tries to track down what his teacher was finding out, and there's an object coming towards the planet. They don't know what it is. And it gets really cool. But there's some really great scenes that would make for a horrible movie scene, but in a book, it's totally cool because they're discussing ideas, they're debating, they're having this, intellectual back and forth of, well, this theory says this. Ah, yes, but Saint so-and-so 2,000 years ago, came to this conclusion and proved this and, this and that. So there's a really cool element of story building where you get this dialogue. And that's part of the monk culture is they're very intellectual. They will politely debate each other and, usually come to some kind of consensus as to what's true or whatever, which is something we don't see much of in today's culture.
No, certainly not.
And politely debate what? So I loved it, and I think you'd really like it too because you're a smart guy.
So how does this compare world building wise to Brandon Sanderson? Because he also lives in the 32-hour book world. So I have to imagine that they've got some similarities.
Only a special mind can write a book so deep and good for 32 hours straight. Yeah, it's different because naturally, first of all, Sanderson's books, Mistborn, what we're referring to, is fantasy, of course, and there's magic. There's a really, really cool magic system and mythological creatures that are kind of semi-natural, semi-supernatural. This book, Anathem, is different because the world building more plays off of the pseudo-history and pseudo-culture that is kind of standing, you're standing on the shoulders of all the giants that have gone before you in philosophy and science and this astrophysics. And in the dialogue that I mentioned, these debates, these discussions, they're constantly quoting back, almost like scripture, references, but they're referencing previous saints who came to some, their thesis of their whole life was about, particle physics in vacuum, or like the so-and-so brother so-and-so, like his whole thing was about free will and consciousness. Like that was his thing. So that's what they'll quote, and they'll mention, his conclusion or his proofs or whatever. So there's world building because of the pseudoscience, well, not pseudoscience, but pseudo history. The first chapter starts off with, or maybe it's the prologue, starts off with a grand sweep over like 6,000 or 7,000 years of history.
Wow.
And it explains how there was like super high level technology. Like we were modifying our DNA to do whatever we wanted. And there was eventually a collapse of civilization. That was called like the first sack. Then the second sack was like AI was taking over or something. And then there was another sack, another collapse. And, the monasteries have stayed steady through all these things. But the secular culture on the outside has just fallen away, gone into barbarism, come back to the Iron Age, into the technological industry, industrial age, whatever. So there's kind of this cool, like, steady thread throughout this planet, which is not Earth, by the way. It's in a different time, different planet. One interesting thing I noticed about the world building techniques that Neil Stephenson uses in this book is words, nouns specifically. So he makes up a lot of words to describe things in this world. One good example that you can kind of compare it to is Lord of the Rings. There's a lot of made up words in Lord of the Rings, but they're mostly names of people and places. And you can tell just kind of the feel of the words, if it's a nice place or an evil place, or if it's an elf or a human. You kind of get a feel for their names and things like that.
Yep.
There's not a lot of guesswork when those things happen, even though there's a lot of them. I mean, how many words did C.S. Lewis make up? Like thousands. Places. There's beautiful words. I don't know how he did it. But in this book, there's a lot of new nouns that are made up, but they're actually much deeper than just names, places, and people. They are scientific theories. There's almost equivalent to a religious practices that these monks do. There's even musical terms, like these monks sing. They sing mathematical equations, for goodness sake.
Wow.
Yeah, they've like been like. There's one thing in the book where they've been working through like this deep dimensional equation over the course of like 1,000 years, and each time they sing the song, it's actually just continuing on the equation, and they're like working through the mathematical like formula in song form. It's
No
so
kidding.
cool. Early on in the book, I was a little overwhelmed. I was like, whoa. What was just said in that paragraph? Because all the nouns were things I don't even know what they are yet.
Right.
But as the story rolls on, you kind of, get it pushed into your brain. Oh, okay, that's like a practice by the monks. This is something that secular people do. This is a musical term. This is talking about like a telescope. This is made up words that you pick up over time. And I've learned, I don't know if I said this earlier, but I've learned so much from this book. Like, I'm learning about quantum like theory.
Yeah.
I'm learning about philosophy, like wild stuff that I never even considered before. And I really like that about this book. I've never had a book teach me so much. And if you're an intellectual, you'll love this book. If you're not, you'll probably hate it.
Well, it certainly sounds intellectually stimulating.
Yeah, you got me all riled up now.
Yeah.
I love it.
I noticed that your words per minute escalate a lot when you're talking about this book.
I cannot listen to this episode back at 1.5 speed.
No, certainly not.
It won't work. All right. So what's next on your list?
Mine is less of a book and another saga. You'll notice a trend with me. I'm always looking for the next really long book series to get into and
to torture yourself with.
Right.
How many books are you talking about?
So this particular one is called The Sorcerer's Ring, and it is 17 books long.
What? How?
17. I don't get it either, but it's
I thought the Wheel of Time was ridiculous with 15, but man.
I'm currently on the 15th book, and it's a good series. I like to describe it as perfectly average. It's not the best book series in the world. It's not the worst book series. It's got a fun, and I say fun. It's got an engaging kind of story, and you want to keep listening because you start to like the characters. But it's not the most like overly detailed book. One thing while we're reading Cinder is some of the very detailed descriptions of things, and you have a really clear image in your mind. This author, Morgan Rice, he goes in a different direction and almost paints with very broad strokes and lets your imagination do the work of filling in exactly how things look or the minute details. If you're not ready for it, it almost comes across like it's just really broad, undetailed, almost lazy. And that's kind of how I felt in the first book a little bit. But I just started to realize that was his writing style. And it ends up being a really cool book. If you're familiar with the term Mary Sue, the characters aren't Mary Sue's. The whole story is a Mary Sue.
Everything falls into place perfectly.
And if you read the first book, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, all the things that have never happened before ever in the history of the world happen.
Oh man!
And
in like 1 week's time.
Yeah, exactly. And nice. I pushed through it. Mary Sue is my least favorite thing in the world, but I pushed through it and got to the other side of the initial thing and really have enjoyed it. But it's a really cool, wizards and magic and dragons, and you've got the swords and the swords, knights in shining armor and their steeds and all of that stuff, and war and tactics.
Is there a prophesied chosen one cliche?
Oh yeah. If there's a cliche with kind of a magic and swords kind of book, it's in this book. It's just
it's got it all.
it's a string of cliches. But it's great. It's a fun series, and I've enjoyed listening through it. And I have to binge this stuff. I can't just like listen for 20 minutes or something. So
Can't stop.
I need a long series, and I get antsy almost if I'm reading just a single book. I really need multiple
That's
books.
so funny.
And
I'm totally the opposite.
yeah. So it's been fun, and it has fulfilled my audiobook needs. I kind of give it like a 3.5 stars so far. Like, it's definitely not a Lord of the Rings or your huge blockbuster book, but it's enjoyable.
The Sorcerer's Ring, is there just one ring to rule them all, or like how does this?
Oh yeah, so you'd think that it
I'm
was like a
curious.
ring, like a thing you put on your finger, which is what I thought when I started the
Uh-oh.
series. It turns out the ring is actually a geographical area that a sorcerer has
Cool.
put up a magic shield. So there is this empire that rules the entire known world. They have conquered
Uh-huh.
every single thing everywhere except the ring. Because of this magic barrier,
Nice.
they can't cross the ring. And
Cool.
whether you're flying or on the ground, you just get incinerated if you try to cross it.
Oh, crispy.
Yes,
Cool.
yeah, it's really
Glad I asked that.
it's a pretty cool premise. But you have the stable boy that is unappreciated and scorned by his family.
Of course.
That happens to be the chosen one, and he
There we
runs
go.
away from home, finds himself in the big city, and is adopted by the king. all in the
What?
course of like 5 chapters.
Oh my gosh.
So it just moved really quickly
Alrighty
into like
then.
super cliches to get the story rolling. But it like, again, you get through it, and you go on the adventures, and there's a lot of brotherhood and loyalty, and just the standing up for virtue and valor and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun, but man, is it chock full of Mary Sue's.
I kind of made fun of the ring, connection to Lord of the Rings, even though I was totally wrong, which I'm glad you explained that. But I finished the first Wheel of Time book, and man, it was, I don't want to say it, but it was a ripoff of Lord of the Rings. There's so many similarities. I could write a list, and I think I did at one point. It's a great book. Awesome fantasy book. But man, it was so similar to the Fellowship of the Rings, or actually just the whole trilogy. But anyway, that's not in this episode. I think I talked about that in a previous one.
Okay, I was about to say, should I go listen to it so that we can go talk about it? But apparently not.
No, I mean, you should listen to it for entertainment value because it's really cool.
All right.
All right. Next on my list is The Massacre of Mankind. And I have to say it like that because this is a sequel to The War of the Worlds,
Ooh.
which is, classic radio drama. Also turned into a really good Tom Cruise movie.
Indeed.
So The Massacre of Mankind is actually by Stephen Baxter and was written in 2017. And it is an official sanctioned sequel to the classic War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, which was written in 1897. Good grief. That's crazy. And of course, that was turned into a radio drama that people literally thought was real. They thought aliens were invading cities around America. And I mean, there was hysteria. There was babies born out of stress. There was people like boarding up their houses and just like losing their mind because they thought the end of the world was happening.
Wow.
Because this radio drama was very realistic, and they didn't have any heads up that this was like pure entertainment. So that's War of the Worlds. But this is Massacre of Mankind, which takes place a few years after, and I think it's during World War II time, I believe. Although the history is different in this world because of the aliens that came in like the early 1909, I think is when this book says when the aliens came the first time.
Okay.
And they were kind of inadvertently defeated by just germs and bacteria on Earth that they weren't prepared for.
Yeah.
So the germs killed off a lot of the aliens, but apparently some of the aliens were able to stick around and successfully subdue most of the population. So the book picks up in, this really dark and unpleasant version of history where aliens, mostly just run the game. If groups of humans get too big, then the big tripods come and knocking and blowing things up with their laser rays and their heat rays, exploding bodies in midair. It's really gruesome. And they don't like groups of people because they could be conspiring and planning and whatever. Yeah, so there's that. It's just this really beautiful, like in the trenches of war, gritty explosions happening everywhere. The main character is a woman, and I think she's a reporter who is carrying a special package to someone who may be able to help communicate with the aliens. That's kind of her goal, is to establish some form of communication for once and try to communicate what do you want and why and how can we, like be at peace or whatever. It's beautiful. I would love to see this as a movie. Like, please, somebody make this into a high budget movie, because it would be an amazing war movie with a really cool sci-fi spin. And there's some really just like raw, nasty stuff that the aliens are doing to humans. It's cool. It's great. It's definitely a 5-star for me. Stephen Baxter is one of my favorite authors. He's just a genius. Everything he writes is super, super good.
Do you have any other favorites from him? I feel like I've read that name before, but
yeah,
I don't necessarily know his books.
Yeah, so Stephen Baxter's written quite a few books, and really like long series. If you look up on Wikipedia, you can find a list of them. But some of them that I have read all the way through is A Time Odyssey, which is really cool because he kind of picked that up from Arthur C. Clarke. And Arthur C. Clarke co-authored at least one or two of these books with him and before he died. So A Time Odyssey is like a retelling of the Space Odyssey, but in a fresh new way.
Okay.
You get to see some subtle connections. That's about it. So A Time Odyssey is awesome, as is the Proxima series. I read the first book, Proxima, which is really, really cool. And then the Long Earth series with Terry Pratchett as well. Stephen Baxter and Terry Pratchett is one of my favorite. I always, if someone's getting into sci-fi and they don't feel like they like sci-fi, but they want to try it, I always tell them, read the Long Earth series, because it's awesome. It's 5 books, really, really cool, neat, fresh storytelling.
Very cool. Definitely have to check him out.
So Stephen Baxter, he's kind of like, in my mind, he's sort of like the new Arthur C. Clarke,
I don't have any more on my list, but I see you have a few more. What are those?
Yeah, so I got 3 more, and I won't go into as much detail in these as the other ones. But the next one I read was Bloodline. This is a Star Wars new Disney canon novel by Claudia Gray, who I really like. She wrote Lost Stars, which is a really, really great Star Wars book. This book was not that good. I only give it a 3-star. There was just a lot of like dull political moments with Leia. This takes place, I think, 2 years after episode 6. So like baby Kylo or baby Ben is like a baby. And Leia is piecing together the Republic mess that is left over after the Empire has, lost its main grip of power. And the truth comes out that she was Vader's daughter, which, the general public doesn't know, but it comes out, and it is a really good, a really cool moment in the story when that comes out. But
interesting.
Yeah, Bloodline, it was all right. There's some stuff in there that I enjoyed, but overall, I'm not like, oh wow, I'll never forget that book.
Yeah. So how much of that do you think is like Claudia's writing versus Disney's like, these are the points that you have to make?
I have thought the exact same thought, because Lost Stars blew me out of the water. Like, that was awesome. And maybe that was pure Claudia Gray's genius. And then this one was more like, well, we got a list of things you need to make happen, which is the case. I heard an interview of a guy who wrote the Jedi's Weapon, and he said Disney gave him like a few ideas, like we need the old temple, we need Luke, we need an apprentice, and we need like these other things to happen. And then, you do whatever you want with it. So I'm assuming that's kind of the rough formula of how these books get written.
Okay.
But I don't know. I don't know how much was Claudia or not. I don't know why it wasn't so awesome as I hoped it would be.
We'll have to ask her.
I'll write an email. Send her a little friend request. I mostly read it though because it's canon and it takes place so early in the the new dark ages of the Star Wars story, which we're still figuring things out. So that's kind of why I read it. It's just out of necessity, just to see like, are there any tidbits in there that would be important for current movies, and not so much. Okay, so the next 2 books on this list is books that I didn't finish because I gave up on them.
Oh, no.
And the first one, we'll talk about that in a minute. The first one is Neverending Story, which honestly I read because of Stranger Things Season 3. That theme song was stuck in my head for like a week, and I never even saw the movie. I still haven't seen the movie. And so I was like, you know what? I'll read the book and then I'll see the movie, because I like to do that. So I started the book. It was fun. It was kind of cool, but it just, I don't know, it kind of crumbled into like, what is happening? Why is this happening? How did we get to this place on the map? Why did that decision? Why did the princess fly up the mountain? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. There's a lot of illogical character decisions that just kicks me out of the story. I talked about earlier how I love a little bit of escapism, or maybe a lot. But when characters are doing illogical, out of character decisions that just are for the sake of a plot, that takes me out of it, and I'm not escaping anymore. I'm analyzing.
Absolutely.
I hate that. So yeah, Never Ending Story, I gave up. I'll give it a 3-star. Could have been way worse. It was written for kids after all, but
Yeah.
and it was actually originally written in German by an author, Michael Indy, and it was translated into English. But yeah, it's a German story. Bet you didn't know that, did you?
I did not. I did not know that.
It is continuing this funny trope that you and I have picked up on, which is it's a book about a book.
Yes. Yes.
There's a lot of them out there. Lord of the Rings, Sanderson's, Mistborn. What else was there? Wheel of Time. You probably can find some others that are books about a book, or there's a major book element inside of the fictional story, which is in a book.
Yeah. Yeah. I know we had a whole talk on that. I can't quite remember all the points.
All right. And the next book that I loved but gave up on was Dune. I know.
Dune.
Tisk tisk. It's like classic sci-fi book that every sci-fi nerd has to read, right?
Right.
I tried twice. My first entry to it was I had a 5-hour drive to Lufkin, Texas, which is way on the east. And I was like, hey, this book is 20 hours. I could listen to half of it. And I did. I listened to 10 almost continuous hours of this book. Even then, I was getting confused of the characters and the houses and the different backstories. Like, I literally felt like I had jumped in to book 3 of like a 7-part series.
Sure. Wow.
So much. There's religious stuff. There's political stuff. There's different planet stuff. Some people have superpowers. I don't even know. That is confusing. And the names are really cool, but they get mixed up in my head too. So I gave it a second try maybe a month ago, and it was worse. I was like, I just really don't know what's happening and why. And I can't enjoy the story if I can't follow the basic, underlying things. So
yeah, no, absolutely. Now, is this one that like in your youth you read and we're trying to return to it, or this is a first attempt?
Well, my first attempt was the first attempt, but maybe like 2 years ago.
Okay.
And then a month ago, I tried to finish. I kind of picked up in the middle of the book, a little bit of overlap to kind of get a refresher, but it was hopeless.
Yep. Yeah.
It's worse than Lord of the Rings when it comes to names and places and drama stuff, backstories. Yeah, too bad. It's always like number 1 or number like 2 or 3 on like sci-fi lists of like the best books ever written.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I gotta give it a shot. It's one, like you said, it's one that always crops up that I've never taken the time to jump into. Is it part of a series or is it a single book?
Yeah. He wrote like 2 or 3 books and then he died and his son picked it up and they're not as good, I've heard. Then there's like the Son of Atreides. It's kind of like the Next Generation. I think is what it's called. And
I might give it a shot.
But yeah, it's a cool world. It's definitely worth a shot. Like I don't want to discourage people from reading it because of my experience. I'm probably just dumb and missed details repeatedly and then I was lost.
That kind of brings up like a point that I wanted to touch on. I approach book reading a lot like it has to be a series. I have to have like more than just this one story. And even at the end of, like a really good series, like at the end of Harry Potter, I'm like, where's the next book? I can't just read one. But then, I see your book reading habits. Thank you, Goodreads. And it's one book at a time, no matter if it's the start of a series or if it's a lone standing novel, you get one book and then you move on to the next thing. So could you kindly explain how you do it? and what does a series need to do to you to bring you back for the second book or more?
Those are some good questions. I don't have like hard, fast answers that maybe I do as I talk it out. I don't know. I don't know why I do it exactly, but part of me is like, I am making up for so many lost years of hating books. I hated novels up till when I was like 20.
Wow.
I finally read the Foundation trilogy and I was like, oh my gosh, like I've been missing out on so many cool sci-fi stories. I love sci-fi like pretty much my whole life. I grew up with it. So I'm kind of like making up for lost time. And I feel like I'm not wasting time if I stay with one series, but I may be missing out on something better.
Okay. It's a FOMO.
It's like different ice cream flavors. Yeah, it's that. If you're missing out on another series that might be better or just different, and it's kind of like tasting all the flavors. So I want to get a feel of different authors and different types of stories, different, realms and ages and times and, technologies. It's more just different ideas and stories. I love a good idea in a story that I may have never thought of. And yeah, so it's a little bit of that. maybe that's about as much as I can get out of my brain. This is why I do it.
There you go.
But I also like variety. That's kind of a big thing with me. As I like just something different every time. So I will finish a book, except for Dune and Land Before Time. Almost said Land Before Time. Never ending story. Another childhood story.
That's a fantastic.
Which there's probably like 30 of them by now of Land Before Time.
Oh yeah, at least.
They've come up all the way into the industrial age by now.
No, Littlefoot's still like 3 years old. So.
Oh my gosh, yeah. He's never going to grow up. So yeah, I like to jump around and kind of get a good taste. And I'll definitely remember the books that like wowed me, like the 4 and 5-star books. I will remember not only because I keep a detailed spreadsheet of all of them, but also because a good book I won't forget. And so I'll come back around, and if I can find the sequel, I'll definitely jump on it. Oh, here's another aspect as to why I do what I do. It's because the way I get audiobooks from Overdrive, there's often a waiting period. So I can't always jump to book 2 and then 3 and then 4 because they may not be available. Especially if they're a good book or a popular book, you got to wait even longer because there's more people getting it in the library system. Yeah, that's probably the heart of a lot of it too. I haven't thought about that till now. So availability is what it is. And I'll find like 20 books and I'll literally place a hold on like 10 to 20 books. And then as they pop up and then when they're available, if I'm done with my current book, then I'll read the next one that pops up that's available. Yeah. And I just kind of take it as I can get it because you are at the mercy of the system.
No, that's a really good point. That's the only reason that I haven't jumped into even something like Brandon Sanderson. I read the, kind of the what I'll call like the foundational trilogy, Mistborn. And I haven't gotten into the rest of the stuff because he's not on my major platform, which is Hoopla. And
bummer.
It's a shame because I would devour. I mean, he's got so many books and they're all like 40 hours long. I would devour that. That's like exactly what I want. I'm just not willing to shell out for the retail price of an audiobook or a paid subscription.
You may not have to.
So
you got to revert to Overdrive. Try it out.
But then I have to. Then I'll turn into you, and I'll only read one book at a time. I can't handle that. I can't handle it.
Yeah. Well, it's a trade-off because I don't use Hoopla because of the limited selection.
It does.
But you don't use Overdrive because of the wait times.
Yep.
It's kind of funny.
Absolutely.
Pick your poison, So, but the things that'll keep me in a series is, a good solid world that has room to grow. Sometimes the first book of a series almost addresses everything or explores the whole world that it's set up, and it's all the loops are closed and tied. Mm-hmm. But other books like Mistborn, there's so many open things. Even like a very slight mention in the early chapters ends up coming back in the second book or something like that,
Yeah.
Like there's all these loose ropes that aren't tied up yet until later, second, third, or fourth book. So those stories I like.
Yeah.
A big world that's, open-ended and there's more than meets the eye or, fact is weirder than fiction, even though it is inside a fictional world. Yeah. I like those. And you mentioned earlier, I think you were saying like, have you ever finished a whole series? And I have actually. I'll pull my nerd meme. Actually,
yep.
I have finished quite a few series. Like the longer series was awesome. Time Odyssey. Don't make me get out my spreadsheet. I'll get it open.
That's a good point about like what keeps you in a series. With like I think of Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn trilogy there as just being this like. Everything was like a little seed planted, a little thought so early on. And it comes to fruition at different points in the story. And so every other chapter, you're discovering something that was planted a couple chapters ago. And it just keeps you it's so engaged as you're finding out the next detail. It's really talented writing. I mean, it's great. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I like that point, and I completely agree especially with Sanderson.
Very cool. Well, do you have any books lined up next when you're done reading what you're reading?
So I'm jumping into the Divine Dungeon, Book 5, Eternium. I'm so excited that it's finally here on on audio. It's been released for almost a year, like 9 months or so, and definitely excited to get into that. It's the conclusion of the series. but without many spoilers, it is the start to a bigger universe.
Oh, even bigger?
Yes. So
Wow.
it's a really cool hit. Like all of Dakota's writing is actually in the same universe. And
I love
so
that.
as you're kind of going through, some of the other book series that he has going on right now, you're like, how does this tie in? How does And so you're like looking for the similarities in the magic systems or everything like that. So I'm super excited to see how this book starts to tie the other series together a little bit.
Yeah, Sanderson does that too. There's connecting things like the shards, some bigger elements like the gods of the worlds and the universe that kind of connect Mistborn with some of his other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. It's pretty cool. I had read that his original plan for Mistborn was to make 3 trilogies. The first would be like fantasy medieval. The second would be like Iron Age, steampunky kind of technology, early technology, and then the third would be actually future, and it's all in the same universe, it's just
Right.
different time eras. And he kind of did that halfway. Although his recent books that came out are actually future. He's actually written some sci-fi, which is
Ooh.
there's a second book finally came out of a series. I'm forgetting the name of it. It's about a girl pilot, and it seems really cool. But he sort of did it, and I don't think those are tied into Mistborn. But the second trilogy after Mistborn trilogy actually is in like a Western steampunk world.
That's cool.
So he sort of did it.
That's cool.
Didn't quite take it into the future, but
we'll see. We'll see if he ends up tying in that futuristic series the same way.
Yeah,
that's pretty
and
cool.
that's why I like Star Wars so much, is because all the interconnectedness of the different stories.
Absolutely, yeah. Except now, nothing that is canon, and all of my Star Wars trivia knowledge is useless. Useless. It's a shame.
If you go to a Star Wars trivia night at the bar, you need to like specify, is this EU or canon?
There you go.
I need to know.
I need to know. Absolutely.
Is this Disney sponsored?
That's great. What's next on your plate, Grove?
Awesome. I got a few. So I want to finish The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. I'm curious to see what else I can find from Neil Stephenson, because he's a genius and he's exploded my neurons in oh so pleasant ways. And then I got this book called Space Opera. It's just called Space Opera.
Just enough intrigue.
Yeah, I think it is like a kind of a comedy, sort of like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But don't quote me on that. Maybe it's an anthology. I'm not sure. I don't know what it is. I just got it because it was on a list of good books.
All right.
And I've got a few other like no-name books I've never heard of before that are similarly on like top 10 sci-fis you need to read from last year or whatever. I kind of go through those sometimes when I'm out of books to look through, or when they don't have the big ones that I want, I just look up lesser exposed books. So
sure.
One of those is Robogenesis by Daniel Wilson. That's kind of a classic robo-apocalypse thing. And I got Exhalation by Tech Chiang, and then Off Armageddon Reef by David Weber. I know nothing about them other than that someone else said they're good. So we'll see.
Awesome. Is this the same guy that did Ball Lightning?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
That was cool. Did you read that?
No, it's on my list of things. If it ever crops up in a way that, like on Hoopla, then I'll read it.
It's a special kind of book. It's really cool.
Very good.
I really enjoyed that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the Dresden Files?
I have. It's a wizard, modern wizard. Right?
Yeah. A friend of mine recommended it to me, so that one might be on my horizon. Apparently, it's a long series. I was
Your favorite.
I was telling him I used the word wizard and long series, and he was like, "I've got it. I've got the book for you."
Ding ding, keyword search.
Yeah. So I might end up checking that one out, especially if I can find it on a free platform like Libby or Hoopla. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Now, Dresden Files had a TV show a few years ago, right?
Yes, he mentioned that and said that it only lasted like 8 or 10 episodes or something.
Of course.
So don't watch it. If you like the books, just stay away, I think.
Yeah, stay far away. Don't let it ruin it for you.
No, yeah.
Well, I think that about finishes this episode. Thank you so much, Daniel, for joining me and engaging in our addiction with audiobooks. It's been fun.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And for those of you listening out there, if you have any sci-fi, fantasy, or other books that you've read or listened to recently that you just love and can't get enough of, let us know. I'm always up for book recommendations, even outside the fictional genres that I love. So send that our way. You can send that to us on our social media or our email. And I hope that if you're looking for some good books, maybe some of the ones we've listed here will be next on your list. Well, thanks so much for listening, and we'll be in your ears next week.
If you like this show, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can also find our previous episodes there and listen whenever you want. We love to hear from our listeners, so if you have any comments or suggestions for future episodes, you can reach us at tvvpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and have a great week.
H.G. Wells, the other guy.
The other guy.
Those white guys
Yeah.
and their stories.